Keir Starmer doesn't seem to have any vision, or if he does, he's not expressing it. He's taking, and perhaps not surprising for such an eminent lawyer, he's taking a very forensic approach to being a leader of the opposition, continuously picking up Boris Johnson on, Partygate and anything else. Any other, and sort of implying he's a rule breaker who doesn't care and therefore can't be trusted to be prime minister. And of course, the problem of taking that approach is that, and doesn't happen in the courtroom, but it does happen in the House of Commons, is that the public are going to start turning their guns on you, turning their attention to you, and saying, well, what about your financial probity and everything else? And what's come out this week? Keir Starmer being investigated for possible breaches of the parliamentary rules in not declaring interest to invitations to football matches, corporate entertainment, football matches, invitation to the British Kebab Awards. It might seem sort of quite trivial matters, but the trouble is when your main armoury against the government is that the Prime Minister is breaking the rules. Well, it doesn't look good when you then start getting investigated yourself. And of course, when Partygate broke out, Keir Starmer didn't wait until Boris Johnson had been fined for breaking the rules. He came out straight away in January and said Boris Johnson should resign because he is being investigated by the police. Well, Keir Starmer is being investigated by the police. He's being investigated by the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards. You start to ask, well, if he thought Boris Johnson should resign for being investigated for these sort of things, why doesn't he resign?
It is extraordinary. It does sort of seem like the Labour leader has potentially set himself up to be hoisted by his own petard in these situations. Especially, I remember the arguments that were had over what might seem to be relatively trivial matters of curtains in the Downing Street flat. Well, tickets to the Kebab Awards or many football games don't seem to be a million miles away from a similar sort of thing. And I do wonder, I'm in two minds about this whole thing, because on the one hand, it does seem trivial. OK, his office might not be the most organised. He might be not declaring things in the way that he should be declaring things. That's an organisational issue. But on the other hand, that's exactly the sort of cry that he's levied against the Prime Minister. And you do sort of see that when the Prime Minister gets into a relatively minor scrape, whether it's standing behind the cabinet room table for slightly too long at the most miserable-looking birthday party I've ever seen photographs of in my life, if that becomes an issue of life or death for this government, if that leads to people standing up seriously in the House of Commons and calling for some sort of national government in response to eating cheap sandwiches around the cabinet room table, it does sort of bring all these other scrapes that the Labour Party leader's getting into perspective.
Yeah, I don't think Keir Starmer would be in trouble I don't think anyone would really bat an eyelid about being late to declare, you'd been to a football match and corporate tickets. If he had some kind of vision, if he had some kind of answer how to solve the cost of living crisis, what to do about the Northern Irish Protocol, and how to get the economy rolling again, if he had ideas on those fronts, well, he'd be sort of putting himself in the position of a, alternative prime minister. And instead, he's just sort of standing up at the dispatch box as if he's the chief prosecutor every Wednesday morning. And he's, he's being sort of judged on that. It's being turned on him. And, it's thoroughly depressing for the Labour Party that Keir Starmer has really made no progress from Jeremy Corbyn in the polls. And you think, Jeremy Corbyn was a toxic figure to many people. He came with a lot of baggage for his sort of association with various left-wing causes and so on. He was a huge sort of personal negative aspect for a great deal of voters in the centre, the sort of voters you need to win an election in Britain. And Keir Starmer, in theory, ought to be running ahead. He ought to be mopping up these votes in the centre. He's not associated with toxic left-wing causes and so on. But instead, when people are protesting against the government, and I think the government's going to suffer a couple of by-election defeats next week, very likely, the votes tend to be going to the Liberal Democrats. And it's not that the Liberal Democrats are going to form a government, but that's a sort of protest. And it's all too easy to see how, come the next election, probably May 2024 if it is, then Conservatives recover and Boris pulls off a surprise election victory again, and that would be so thoroughly depressing if you're a Labour person.